Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hang In There. Today's episode is an important and meaningful one. I'm so honored to share it with you. Today, I'm joined by Christine, the owner and coach of Leto Advisors and Advocates, an international divorce and co-parenting group. Christine is a certified divorce and co-parenting coach, a clinical trauma-informed coercive control and domestic violence counselor, a certified survivor supporter, and an expert witness. She is also currently applying her experience and training to become a parenting coordinator. Her personal journey began 13 years ago in the family court system, navigating the complexities of an international case that spanned across 2 U.S. states. What began with her on her knees, desperately fighting for her children, has transformed into a story of resilience and empowerment. Today, Christine and her children are not only safe and thriving, but she has dedicated herself to paying it forward, guiding, supporting, and empowering others through the challenges of the family court system, divorcing and co-parenting. Christine is a fierce advocate for children's rights and has played an integral role in developing and educating lawmakers on child protective rights laws, furthering her mission to ensure the safety and well-being of children. Christine, welcome. I'm so honored to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited. Your story is just one of incredible strength and transformation. I know it will resonate deeply with many people listening. I would love to just start by going back to the beginning of your journey. What was that chapter of your life like, and how did it lead you into this mission of helping others?
I was living outside of the country and came back to visit in the U.S. I did not have residency, although I was a citizen, so I had to file for jurisdiction, and I was able to get that because I could prove that the filing was for abuse and cruelty. After 2 years, that state gave me full legal and physical custody of my children. Their father was allowed to have visitation. After a couple of years, we saw less and less of their father, and so I had an opportunity business-wise come up, and I relocated us. The state that we moved to was very different in the sense that there are states that are child safety focusing, and there are states that are parents' rights focusing. I went from a child's rights state to a parents' rights state. So unfortunately, when I filed for arrearages, that was, again, one of the parts of the post-separation abuse that was used against me to keep power and control over us. And in that dynamic and in the new state, he was able to counterfile for a change in the parenting plan. At that point, a guardian ad litem had been assigned, and none of the past information that had been reviewed for 2 years in the previous state were taken into account. And at one point, the guardian ad litem's report revealed or stated that I had Munchausen by proxy, and I had caused my children's issues, and that I had parent alienated. I couldn't understand that. I had thrown every piece of evidence that I had, third-party professionals, and I was sitting in traffic heading back to my office after a court hearing, and there was an ad on the back of a bus that said, "We believe you." And that was at the point where I finally realized that I wasn't alone in this journey, and I started looking for help. I identified a lot of advocates as well as a lot of professionals, and one of those being Tina Swithin with One Mom's Battle, Dr. Christine Catrola, who has coercive consulting in Connecticut. There's, numerous people out, Daniel Pollack, who has focused on Kayden's law. And I started working with these individuals and just creating a part of me that was able to deal with this, because I myself, had to understand the trauma and what had happened and how my brain and body responded to what was happening. And my responses were natural and normal, but going into a business like the courtroom, I had to approach that differently and create a different part of me that was empowered by all of the work of the people that had come before me. And fortunately, I was able to turn my case around. It did not look good for a very long time. A lot of things happened, that were very traumatizing to my children. But I was very fortunate in the fact that we were able to turn the case around by the end and had a great parenting plan that was in the best interest of my boys. So moving forward, those individuals that I had worked with, I felt like I had all this education and knowledge, and to some degree felt that I had been successful in the benefit of my kids. So I wanted to start working with these individuals that also were going through this path. And, there's people all around us all the time that are struggling and we don't know. I had
Yep.
one client come to me and ask if I would testify in the Supreme Court to explain a situation that I had been in, to educate them on making better rules and laws for the family court in the state that I'm in. That state had had over 18 children in 20 months be murdered by the hands of a parent.
Wow.
And 15 of those children had been in the system. So trying to find where those flaws had unfortunately gone wrong for those kids and how to better that. So I spoke about the guardian ad litem. I had testified in the Supreme Court about how that person was very biased and had manipulated timelines to benefit the other party in my case. So long story short, got up a couple of days later, watching the news, and my kids go, "There's mommy," and I'm on TV. All of the people that came to testify at the Supreme Court for this DV task force. And of course, it was the back of me, but it was the sound of my voice. It was, it was me. And so I went and got back in bed and put the covers over my head. And all of those parts of my body and brain were completely triggered into shut down, run away, oh my gosh mode. And
Right.
I had to make a decision right then and there. And at that point, my kids were old enough too to give me permission to tell their story. It's not just me that's a part of it, it's them too. So we made it something that, for instance, Leto is the Greek goddess of motherhood. She and Zeus had Artemis and Apollo, who are the twin gods, are warrior gods for children.
Oh, I love that.
And yeah, so we had a telescope and we really made a game of it. And then, for them every year, they have decided, they set the budget for the business. And when I say the budget, I mean, they decide how many kids is mom going to help in family court this year. So,
That's incredible.
yeah, and they've been a part of a lot of initiatives that I've worked on as well that they wanted to engage in some way, shape, or form to, but they make those calls. So
This can be something that can be very therapeutic to talk about and to try to advocate.
mhm.
And so
I
I
had
think
been
that's
told,
incredible.
yeah, I had been told by a child therapist that I wasn't telling my children enough. And so
Yeah.
I was trying to work on what was child appropriate. And then because, of course, I had been told for so many years it was all my fault. And
Right.
then having the court pretty much validate what had happened to me by saying that I was at fault, that I had I had Munchausen by proxy, and that I had parent alien, and I was a bad person. I was a bad mom. And
Wow.
so trying to navigate what I had been told versus what reality is, and this other therapist saying, no, you're not saying enough. You have to give them, water to drink. Otherwise, what is that saying about drinking the sand? So I think that they know so much more than we tell them, and they're capable of so much more than we give them credit for. And
Absolutely.
they see around them too. It's not like we have to say much. They have coaches, they have other parents' homes they go to, they have teachers, they see interactions between children and adults, and they know what's healthy and what feels right and what doesn't. And they don't have to be told that.
I was told the same thing by my therapist. And my therapist actually has been she's kind of collaborated with us all. And she told me very early on, they can handle it. And
Yeah.
I was still in the mindset of, I don't want to bash because I thought I was going to get in trouble.
Mhm.
And it wasn't like I was ever looking to bash. I was just looking to help and educate them. And it took me a while to get comfortable talking to them about it. And once I did talk to them and open up to them more and more, they really told me, even as adults, that they were glad that I told them these things because
Mhm.
it helped them understand how, from their point of view, how things were looking, and then understanding where it was coming into play on my end. And they could understand my behavior a little bit better too.
Right. Yeah. It's very confusing when we have to try and tell them that we have no control over a situation, that a court and all these other adults that are a part of the situation are going to be able to tell mommy what to do. that I'm not their protector in this situation or their advisor or their guide and in that, and that what I say may not go, and you're the person that they turn to and trust. So it's a very challenging dynamic to navigate.
It's really tricky. I agree. And the child rights piece of this is such a big deal. And I love that you advocate for these kids but like guiding families through what you call a high conflict divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I think when I was going through it, I never knew what a high conflict divorce was. I knew it was very hard. I knew that I had been abused. And, there's so many times where if you can name something, it just really helps you understand it better. And I think let's talk about what high conflict really means in the context of divorce.
Well, in the court, it's labeled high conflict because they're seeing that the progress that a divorce should normally make is not happening. And that is because the two people can't agree. So they're seeing it as a two-person problem, where in reality, outside of that, if they looked into the details, there was actually only one person that is causing the conflict. There is a high conflict person that is making it difficult to move forward. And, when we receive an email that states, oh, you said this and you said that, and we're going to do this, that, and the other. And, Joey came home and said all these horrible things that you're doing and saying, it's our natural human response to be like, no, we didn't agree to this. This is where, on this email right here on this date. And we go on and on and on and on and on defending ourselves in these 2-page emails that, no, these are the facts. I can show you everything.
Right.
And they see that as high conflict versus us just giving that one-liner saying, no, I don't agree with your forced narrative. I'm not going to get into that right now. Just here to discuss co-parenting issues. I don't believe that Joey said that. That's not what I understand his feelings are. And we can go back to talking about this in a couple of days once we've calmed down or you change your perspective. So that's what they see as, okay, there's one person that's the problem and the other person is trying to deflect, diffuse, and shut this down. But that takes a huge reframing to be able to deal with this like a business, because everything in your body is protecting your children. This is how our brains are wired, our nervous system, like everything.
Right.
So, I always like the family systems where you can create parts of yourself, who you are as a mom, a sister, a daughter, an employee. All of those different parts of you are very different. If I was to like fill a room with all the people in your life, they would say something very different about you based on how they interact with you. So you have to create a part of you that deals with this situation, and it could be very different from who you really are. And being able to understand your triggers and your behavior and treat your body like a spacesuit and be like, okay, this is what's happening right now. My operating system is either shut down or gone on the blink. And how do I actually identify, is this smoke or is there a real fire going on? So I believe those are kind of the phases that we go through to make sure that we can reframe it and respond in ways that do not make us appear that we're the high conflict problem, that there is a one person problem.
It's really hard to control, and you're just in such a fragile space in those moments anyways, because you've actually gone and you're trying to leave, which is very vulnerable time. And to keep your composure and to use all of those skills and to separate yourself is really hard. And that's what's so amazing about the kind of guidance that you provide, where you can kind of give that reassurance and you can educate them and help them to understand this is what helps in the court system. This is what helps you. I know it feels like you're not protecting enough when you're acting like this, because you do. You just want to protect and try to help everybody understand that this isn't my fault.
Yeah, there's a very integral gap in between where, our attorneys deal with the law. They deal with, they play in the pool with all the different pieces of the court professional process. And those are their colleagues. Those are people that they work with every day on tons of different cases. It's not just your case. And then,
Right.
your therapist, of course, understands the emotional dynamic and the trauma and how your body is responding, that they don't understand the family court dynamic. So that gap in between where there's somebody that can understand the emotional piece of it, but is not a therapist, that's what your therapist is for, but integrating that into reframing it to the business that gets you in the door with your attorney so that they see, understand, and can be empowered by your documentation where it's strategic and we're not throwing everything at it. It's unemotional, unopinionated, non-labeling. This is what happened. These are the facts. That's what attorneys can work with. They can't do the day-to-day, kind of knee-jerk where everything gets blown up. If it doesn't raise to the importance of the court, it's not going to be something they're going to respond to. And you don't want to pay them to have to respond to it if it isn't going to be something beneficial. So a lot of my clients come through me to say, hey, what do I do with this? And of course, I always say, your attorney has the last say. I am not an attorney, but these are the options that I believe that you have. And I think that if we reframe it and look at it this way, is this something we can use strategically, or is this something that we need to respond to and document? Is this something that we just put in our back pocket and reframe and shake it off? Or, do we up this to our attorney and say, I think we need to do a filing here because of these reasons. And, here's my suggested filing and request to the court.
And that's so huge because you're saving, like you said, billable hours here, because normal people don't know what to bring to their attorneys and which are the most important pieces to document, because they all feel very wrong and they can be bullying and they can be lengthy and repetitive, and it's very confusing. And I remember using my lawyer when I had a lawyer for a period of time when I left, and she said, do you have a therapist? And I said, yes, I do. And she's like, these are all questions that would be better suited for your therapist. You're basically paying me to, be your therapist, and I'm not. So I think that's a really good point too. And it saves so much money. Lawyers are so expensive.
Yes.
And a lot of us haven't gone through these things before. So I think that's super helpful.
Right. Yeah. I think in believing, growing up, even as kids, we want to believe that the people that are put in power in this system that has been created is to benefit us and, will appreciate and understand and be compassionate to our emotional journey. But that's really not their job. That's not what they do. But having that mind shift and how to work with them efficiently in the best interest of your kids, that takes a lot of work, because even I myself was stuck in my victimhood. Like, no, listen to me. This happened to me. These are the facts. This is all my documentation. I have all of these doctors and all of these hospitals and all of these people that say that this happened. Why are you saying no? Why are you forcing a situation that's hurtful? And when I finally stepped back from that position and started taking it very businesslike, then I was heard, then I was listened to, and my attorney was like, all right, let's put you on the stand. You're ready. So
that's super helpful. I think it's very difficult to do, especially on your own.
Yeah.
People can be coached, and especially when it comes to our children, we will do anything to protect them. So I think that's just so important for people to know that this exists. This kind of help exists.
Yes.
And we're all on the same team, and the majority of us have all experienced various forms of being in the courtroom in these situations. So there is help, and you're not alone. And I think hearing that is just it's so relieving. I wish I would have known. I was unhealthy. I was so nervous and scared. And just knowing that somebody else has gone through this and somebody else has learned things and they're going to help me would have been really great. I wanted to lead in a little bit to your clinical trauma-informed counseling experience. I think it adds a really powerful layer to your work. A lot of people still associate abuse with physical violence. And this is a big deal for me because, as people who've listened to my podcast know, I was never physically hit. But I am suffering to this day from the effects of abuse. And the coercive control being such a large part of what domestic violence is, kind of at its core, I think more people, first of all, should be trained in coercive control. If you could just explain on your end, being trained with it, why it's so damaging, and what are some identifiers that we can look out for to try to help people who are in the mindset where I'm not being hit? Am I being abused?
Right. Well, coercive control, the most basic form is making sure that you know you have no power and no control over your situation. And in most cases, if you're made to believe that it's your fault, and that's done with what we call DARVO, DARVO. So that's deny, attack, reverse, victim, and oppressor. So if you were to go to any person in your life, if they love and support you in a healthy manner, you can confront them and address a situation, and that'd be a healthy conversation. But if somebody is to respond to you by defending themselves and getting aggressive with you and being like, no, that's not true. That's not what I said. This is what I did. This is, it was your fault. You're the one that did this. Hey, and you remember, and they bring out the list of all the things that you did wrong. And, they plant in your head and you start to believe those things. You start to believe that you are so small and so powerless and you're the one that should be sorry and you're the one that needs to change. You're the one that needs therapy. And once you become that small thing, that's where the physical violence can come in as well. So the coercive control, that's so damaging, and it does continue past divorce.
Yes.
So the one thing that you can become safe with if you have a restraining order or there's no physical interaction, even if you were hit, moving forward, they can still have power and control over you through coercive control. And that's a big part of the post-separation abuse wheel, which was, the additional wheel that was created to the domestic violence wheel. So just the counter-parenting, if somebody says, well, your child needs to be in therapy, the other parent is not going to allow that therapy. They're going to stand in the way of that. You say blue and they say red.
Yep.
So anything to become an issue. The financial abuse of that's, the controlling piece as well. There's legal abuse. They can consistently file and file and file and file all of these ridiculous things, pretty much to wear you down and bankrupt you.
Yeah.
That, again, is another part of, that control piece. So the harassment, the stalking, they isolate you by creating a false narrative, by telling people that you're the one to blame. And, if they have the court backing their position or the position they've created, and there are things that are happening that are not in the children's best interest, then people do believe that narrative because you're losing. Well, if the court said and the court ordered, then you must be wrong. Well, that's not exactly true. So there's a lot of pieces to the separation abuse that continues that, same type of abuse. And they're very good at it because they know what buttons to push with us. They already know how to control you. So, you click into that, I'll do anything for peace. I'll do anything to keep them happy. I'll do anything to make this go okay if they just leave me alone. So that's where the first key is, where you're not allowed to and or given permission to feel anything, to have your own identity. So, you can have tough conversations, take accountability for your behavior without becoming defensive.
And that still kind of lingers after you've left too. I find myself immediately trying to defend myself with a lot of things. And I don't need to be that way. And it's exhausting still. It's just very trained in my mind to have to defend everything. And I never knew what was going to come. I never knew which defense I was going to need to use. And it's just so confusing and so difficult. And then when you leave, that post-separation abuse that not many people know exists, they think the court's going to protect them from it. And they can't. It just doesn't happen. And so it's again another threat that people aren't expecting that make them second guess.
And a big piece of that too is that there isn't, or they haven't made a correlation between how the mother is treated versus how the children are treated. There's so much you can get away with when it comes to how a mother is treated, or a parent, I should say. This does happen regardless of gender. There obviously are, it's like 1 in 4, I believe, women that are abused, and 1 in 7 men that are abused.
a lot of your advocacy centers on protecting children in the court system, where parental rights often take priority. And we've talked about this so many times, parental rights over child safety.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen, in your experience, how have you seen children's voices getting minimized or ignored in these cases? I've got some examples on my end as well.
Well, unfortunately, they believe that children can be manipulated. And I do know that there are a lot of cases where children are threatened, within the home to behave in certain ways such that they stay safe and they have to march in those instances. But when they're in a safe space and they're speaking to a therapist that is truly supporting them, and I understand that these professionals are hard to identify, but until the child is of a certain age, then the court and or court professionals seem to believe that parents have this magical ability to control a lot of the professionals in their lives. For instance, I was blamed when, my son was being picked up by the guardian ad litem and their father, and my son chose to run away from school. And that was my fault.
Wow.
I was like, I hadn't seen the child in 8 hours. And that's a knee-jerk response. That isn't anything that I could have had any kind of control over.
Right.
But the court took that as, oh, well, the guardian ad litem said that it was her fault, so it's her fault. So, in the big picture, they put all of those things together and say, oh, well, everything that happens and everything that children do, it came down to the point of, I would say, two of the most prominent children's hospitals in the country that had done evaluations and or treated me or my children were devalued in the court. I was like, I think these professionals would be pretty upset to know that after all the years that they've been through medical school and been providing help, that I manipulated them, that I had this grandiose, wand that did that. But no, the children aren't listened to until they get to a certain age to be able to advocate for themselves, and even sometimes through therapists and guardian ad litems, the truth can be twisted as well. So but we see now a lot of groups of children that are advocating for themselves and coming forward in these groups where they feel empowered to change the system, and where adults have failed, the children, I truly hope are going to succeed. And a lot of the laws that we're creating, unfortunately, are being named after some of these children that lost their lives in that battle.
Right, especially Kayden's law.
Yes.
I know you had a role to play in that as well. I would love to dive into that a little bit so people understand just the changes that have occurred in some states because of Kayden's law. It's been impressive.
Yeah, there's a couple of states that have taken on the full Kayden's law, and Kayden was a 7-year-old girl that was murdered by her father in the state of Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania was one of the first states to pass it. There are other states that are taking on portions of Kayden's law. They aren't taking on all of it. And there are groups like the National Family Violence Law Center out of Georgetown Law that are reviewing the effects of these laws being put in place in family court and seeing, like, are they helping or are they hurting? Because not every case is cookie cutter or the same. And in some instances, there could be something that's put in place. Like, it feels like if somebody wants to hurt somebody, they will go through every loophole to do it. So we have to make sure that we close all those loopholes with these laws. But Kayden's law specifically, it limits expert testimony so that these people that get on the stand or provide reports to the court actually have domestic violence or abuse expertise and experience with working with victims.
I love that.
Yeah, you can't just say that I went to school and have a PhD in how domestic violence people respond. I don't think you could get your PhD without having interacted with somebody that has actually been a victim of domestic violence or some form of abuse to, have an opinion about how they present and respond, because it's very different than what we would assume, a person that hasn't had that trauma happen to their brain.
Right.
And I always say, like, body and brain, because I don't want it to identify with who you are. Like, you are the person that listens to your body and your brain. That voice in your head is actually your brain operating, and we have to focus on our higher self that controls all of that. But back to Kayden's law, banning the unsafe reunification Also, we've seen a lot in the news, reunification camps where transporters come and remove children from their residential home, their primary home, and move them into pretty much an Airbnb with somebody who is not a licensed therapist and forces them to interact for an unknown period of time with their abuser. So there have been laws that have been created, and a part of Kayden's law that restricts reunification to licensed therapists in family therapy, and that the child is not removed from any home, that they, have their parenting plan set and they attend therapy sessions with each parent that is involved fully in this reunification process, and that the therapist is also covered, hopefully, by the network of either one of the parents, the insurance network, that is. And then mandating judicial training. This is actually a huge piece, that the court professionals are actually trained on evidence-based dynamics of family violence, knowing what physical, emotional, sexual, and coercive control looks like. A lot of court judges have not been trained in that. They're trained in law. They aren't trained in the emotional piece of this. So that's where we can bridge some of those gaps. And then also, when considering custody, they look at the allegations of abuse, any ROs that are placed in criminal cases. A lot of work that Joan Muir has done over in the National Family Violence Law Center is to identify that the criminal courts and the family courts don't communicate. So you could have somebody that is facing all sorts of charges in criminal court, but they still have full access to their children through family court.
Wow.
So we want to make sure that those two groups are communicated, and the judge that's making those custody decisions is aware of any other type of criminal activity that, they're considering putting a child in the care of. So
I can't believe that they don't communicate, or that they had not communicated prior. I mean, that just seems so easy.
Yes.
And it makes sense, to a certain extent too, because when I was going through it, I had an order for protection in the courthouse. And during my court proceeding that I had to actually be my own lawyer for, it wasn't even brought up. I was trying to get some sort of protection with the children in place. They were very upset. I just felt like, I have all of this information sitting in here. Why aren't we talking about this? And I'm no lawyer. So I didn't have the confidence to bring it up, but I just kept thinking, after the fact and after I was out, and I'm just having all these thoughts like, why aren't we being helped when we have records in a courthouse? And it's as if it never happened. And that's very shaming in a way too for us survivors who have gone through the proper channels and trying to protect ourselves, and then having, again, no support. So it's very frustrating, but I'm really happy that they're now going to be communicating. So important.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow, that is incredible. I mean, those are all really good points to have in place. And like you said, every situation is unique, and it's hard to really be able to target these different loopholes that they're going to find. All we can do is do our best to try to put safeguards in place, because we can't possibly predict everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a part of the strategy work that divorce coaches do as well, is because there's a pattern of behavior with these individuals. I've been doing this for a number of years now, and I'd have to say that the cases really flow very similarly. If there is a certain action that is taken, the next step will be either A or B. These are the two routes that they will take. And being able to prepare your client for that really takes the shock value out of it, so that, you aren't thrown off guard and triggered into a state of responding in a way that isn't in your best interest when it comes to, the court's eyes. So understanding the behavioral patterns are a real thing when you're dealing with certain personality types. So, diagnoses when it comes to trying to label these different types of behavior, that's pretty difficult, and the court doesn't really embrace a lot of those unless they're very specific to be identified, like when they talk about like narcissism or borderline personality disorders and all of that. Even a psych eval, you aren't going to be able to get a bottom line on some of those. And even if you were, is that going to be so severe that it's going to affect the parenting plan? And they're usually at a cost of like $20,000 to get some of those evaluations done.
Wow.
So even though we feel like that might be a great way to go, sometimes that can not work out in the way that we're hoping. So really keeping your strategy, your documentation, the way you communicate, the way you present in court, staying kind of on the business line is talking the language of the court. Because again,
Yes.
until they've adopted laws like Kayden's law and start getting educated here locally, we finally have one judge that actually was a part of writing the DV protocol for our state. So she's
Wow.
probably the only judge that I'm aware of, in the state that actually understands what domestic violence and sexual assault looks like, because she was a prosecutor for that. And we're hoping that that will overlap into some of her custody orders when it comes to action. So again, she's
That's
new.
helpful.
So yeah, but those lines really aren't crossed currently. They are in some courts, but taking the strategy piece of it is sometimes more effective than going for the psych eval side of it. That can get a little bit challenging. Not that I'm saying discounting it at all, but every case is very different again. But unless you really have glaring lights when it comes to the psychological piece of it, it's best to deal with the courts as a business.
It's really hard. And I think this is such an important piece of what you do, because as a survivor, it's very difficult to control the trauma response.
Hmm.
And I still find myself, if I'm triggered, I have certain triggers. I have zero control for a period of time. I
Mhm.
react until my brain can catch up, but my body feels it before my brain can really kind of control it. And I think just having someone on your side who can inform you and kind of just be that support and tell you, no, you can do this. You can
Mhm.
do this. And if you get triggered, I'm here. And, they do try to push your buttons. And even the other lawyers can try to push your buttons because they know what they are. And man, having that judge trained in domestic violence is going to be, I hope, a very huge win, because I think just understanding why survivors act as they do, it would be really comforting for me looking back to know that if I did have a moment where I couldn't think or something was said and I needed a minute, it wasn't because I was unstable. It was because I have experienced trauma and I was dealing with it in that moment. I think that's really, really important. I hope more states can bring in people who are trained in that. And, that would be a really big way we could help the whole court process for abuse survivors.
Right. And as you say, too, control opposing counsel as well, because if they know that there is an abuse claim, then when you take the stand, they can use that against you. As you say, a lot of people will go into fight, flight, or fawn. And until we are able to get enough tools and resources on board to try to identify how those responses and how our body works, it is very challenging. There are some I still today can't control either, but I'm able to voice, I'm triggered right now. And
Yes.
so the people that love and support me will go, okay, and they know what steps to take. And that's what's so wonderful too in moving forward is once you're able to identify those parts of you, then you can communicate those to people. It is a very much part of your pattern to accept those types of behavior. When you were talking before about identifying coercive control behaviors, being able to identify green lights too, that, oh, this is actually a safe person. That's really challenging to do. And we stay in those patterns of what we believe love is until we break what our belief system is. So, and finding healthy
Yes.
people to surround us, and a new partner that says, okay, I get this. And there's nothing that I'm trying to do or hurt you with, but I understand why you would see it that way possibly. Or, they don't need to validate you. They just have to be there for you and sit and wait and be okay with that. But
Yes.
like with opposing counsel, sorry, I'm going around in circles.
No.
With opposing counsel, they use that against you as well. I remember when I was on the stand for 2 days. I think it was 10 hours total. And at one point,
Wow.
because I kept referring to third-party professionals versus my own opinion, because I'm at the time didn't have any licenses or any certifications or couldn't have an opinion about anything other than what I had witnessed in my facts. And they were trying to catch me, while I was on the stand. And so finally the attorney screamed at me and said, "Can't you answer like a mother instead of a
Wow.
scientist?" And
Wow.
I was like, "So much for advocating for your kids." I was like,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
yeah. But that was the intention, was to trigger me. And fortunately, when you have a good attorney, my attorney objected immediately, asked for a break, knew to get me off the stand, and I knew for myself, I needed to drink water. Your limbic brain, you can't eat or drink.
Oh,
You're literally deer in headlights. If you can drink something or eat something, you're telling your limbic brain, I am not in danger right now. I know you smell smoke and all the red lights are going off, but we are currently not in danger. I can drink, I can eat, I am safe. I always recommend people when they go to court that they wear their tightest pair of Spanx or whatever shapewear they wear. I should say shapewear now because there's so many different. When I was younger, it was Spanx and that's all we had. But,
yeah.
Just being able to stay present in your body, like feeling that pressure against your body. Some of those
Yes.
like teeny little biological tricks that we can do, that's a part of our strategy to navigate and for that part of you to get educated on how to, really, I hate to say battle, but it's a position that you're taking in this business transaction that happens to have your children involved, which, it's again, very hard to have that paradigm shift where you're like, yeah, no, I'm going to be able to do this rationally and calmly when you're messing with my kids.
Oh, it's so difficult.
Yeah.
And nothing makes sense. And when you're purposefully getting triggered by the other side, it's so unimaginably difficult to get through without a person there to help you. What you're doing for these people is incredible. We need to give our survivors the best chance they have. And there's so many things we could change. This will be a really good one to have more options for just people across the country to have help.
Yeah, a lot of states are trying to have more legal support. Obviously, in research studies, they've been able to prove that if you have an attorney versus not having an attorney, you're more successful in the request that you're making, because obviously your attorney speaks the language of the court.
Right.
But a lot of people don't have access to attorneys, as we were talking about before. They're very expensive. I've worked with a lot of clients that are pro se, and being able to advocate for themselves in court is very challenging. And part of the initiatives as well that I've heard are that judges are more supportive and helpful to pro se litigants, that they help them navigate the system. And we have seen some of that in court. But at the same time, you also don't want that used as a position too of the abuser to say, this is their stage and where they put on their next show for everybody to believe in. And if they're on their own and, well, I can't afford an attorney because she took it all from me or he took it all from me. There's so many different dynamics that people can use in court. I see where the challenge is when it comes to being a court professional and identifying what the truth is and learning what evidence-based violence looks like and how these behaviors become patterns and perpetrate the system. So, and once the eyes of the court are off, you have to make sure you have that parenting plan, that there aren't a lot of loopholes in, and does have recourse for you depending on how long you're going to be in the system, which is pretty much until your kids age out.
Right, exactly. And knowing those loopholes as a person without a lawyer or without a coach is really it's so difficult. And when I was going through it, I was spending a lot of time at the self-help desk. I was asking the questions because I didn't have the money. I couldn't afford to keep my lawyer. It was very hard and it was really stressful. And I just feel for the people who are experiencing the same thing. So getting this information out there to other survivors who really could use some help and knowing where to look for that help is very important. And I'm so grateful we're able to share that today.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've worked with many, many survivors, and we're trying to keep this hopeful and empowering. And we're also trying to give them information. Is there any sort of practical advice that you would like to give people who are looking for help, who are looking for guidance during a high conflict divorce, or just guidance on, is what is happening to me in my home abusive?
I think keeping a journal is really helpful, not only for your own documentation should you end up in a court situation, but being able to look back and read through some of the things that have happened to you, even if you were to hand that journal over to a professional or therapist, or say you have a survivor support group in the area. And if you didn't feel safe doing that, like being able to hand it off to a friend. I know that there are a lot of people in different industries that understand this type of behavior and that have been through it that will be very helpful. For instance, I work with a person at a bank that's a manager of a bank, and they will create bank accounts for survivors or people that are in those situations that are trying to get out. And one of the biggest things that keeps us away from being able to file and get away is the financial piece of it.
Yep. So true.
She will have somebody come through the back door with a backpack and create an account for them, and they go back out the back door and nobody knows the difference, and they can go by or have a friend go by and put money into that account so that they eventually can build up a way to get out. So there are people, look for those people, look for those, we so often say trigger. Well, there's also glimmers. So, there's those glimmers where we see a sparkle in somebody that we know we can possibly trust to help us, and shedding the shame and the fear, and reaching out to get that help. And I think understanding yourself too, being able to treat your body as a spacesuit, and that you are your higher self inside of your brain that is listening to how the operating system is going through and going, oh, that's depression. Okay, yep, that's how I respond when I smell smoke in this way vision. So once we start to understand how we operate, and we have documentation that we can look back on and validate ourselves, and then find those individuals we can reach out to and say, is this normal? Is this,
Right.
How would you can even say, I'm asking for a friend, and see well, this doesn't sound normal. This doesn't sound healthy. This doesn't sound... And I suggest that you go to this area to find this type of support or this type of help. But it just takes that one step. And there is a lot of help out there. Yeah.
I love advocating for our shelters. I mean, I remember I called a local shelter early on, and I was so confused as to what was happening to me. And just hearing them validate me and saying, no, this is abuse. This is not your fault. We can help you. We can advocate for you. We have legal help for you. We have a shelter if you need to come. They also can give just such good information and statistics and point you in the right direction. The shelters are so valuable.
Yes.
They're just trained to help, and they're so compassionate. They have the right language. I love just advocating for them. They're very underrated. That really gives hope to a lot of people. Change is coming. We can do this. We're making strides. And it takes us all to speak up. And it's really, really hard. I appreciate you, Christine, sharing your story, your courage, your expertise with us today. For anyone interested in learning more, connecting with Christine, or exploring her coaching and advocacy work, please visit www.letoadvisors.com. It's LETOADVISORS.com. This will also be listed on our resources page at hanginthere.net. So any of you who have any questions or just want to look into the help that she offers, it's incredible. I would highly encourage everyone to take a moment to read through the testimonials on that website. They really highlight just how beautifully Christine blends compassion with strategy and helps parents to navigate the conflict, communicating effectively, and protect their children in the process. She is instrumental in helping her clients transform from fear and overwhelm to clarity, resistance, and hope. I did want to also include, for listeners interested in participating or learning more about national initiatives to protect children and reform family courts, please visit the National Safe Parents Organization at www.nationalsafeparents.org. And I want to thank everybody for listening today and for supporting our mission to empower, educate, and spread strength to survivors everywhere. Christine, you do such incredible work. It's been just a blessing having you on today.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate your time today.